Hey everybody, welcome back to a Bright Idea podcast, a show where we talk with entrepreneurs about the aha moments that launched their businesses. For those who are new here, I am Amber Key. I am your host of this incredible podcast. If you are not new here, like I said, welcome back. On this podcast, we explore the innovative, impactful, and often untold stories about entrepreneurship. And today we have a special guest who I will introduce in a moment. But before we get started, I want to talk to you about podcasting. And the reason that I want to talk to you guys about podcasting for a little bit before we get started is because, first of all, it's related to this episode. And I do think that my long hiatus between season 2 and season 3 deserves a bit of an explanation. Not really. I think my last episode was in May. For those who listen to Chosen Advisory Groups with Bilal Afalabi. If you haven't, you should definitely check that out. We talk about all things money, how to make money work for you, and he's just such an incredible person, so it's definitely worth the listen. But after that period, it was around springtime, and I just needed a bit of a break. Being a podcaster is it's sort of a full-time job. When it comes to podcasting, for me, I discover a topic that I'm interested in, and then I find a guest. So I try to find an entrepreneur that's in that field that I want to talk to at that moment. Then you have to reach out to that person. You have to schedule the guest. You have to research the business and the industry so that you know what you're talking about in the interview. You're conducting the interview. You're making sure all of the production is going perfectly during the interview so you don't have to redo the interview again. And then I have to market it to you guys so you know when the episode is going to drop, and monitoring how many people like it, how many people don't like it. So I decide if this is a topic I want to continue, or if this is a topic that maybe I don't go back to. I think you guys get it. Podcasting, running a show, is a full-fledged machine. It's a well-oiled machine, I think, but it takes a lot of work. Thankfully, I have my editor, Chris, who I really would not be able to do this show without. He edits the majority of the episodes, and if he can't edit, I have my great sister who steps in and helps me. I also have friends who have stepped in and helped with websites, helped with social media, all of the things. And so I have to give thanks to those people because I do not do it alone, but and we'll get into it in this episode. Podcasting is a lot. Actually, when I was researching, doing research for this episode, I found that 75% of podcasters quit after 3 episodes, and 90% of podcasters don't even make it to 20 episodes. That's incredible. How many people do you know, podcasters that you listen to each and every week, that have hundreds of episodes? Those people are basically unicorns. So Bright Idea has 30, almost 40 episodes. It's a lot of work. And so that is a perfect segue to my guest today. His name is Dumi Mabhena. He is the founder of Shanda Studio. Shanda Studio is an AI-powered app that streamlines podcast production, making content creation effortless. So through Shanda Studio, users can save time and effort editing their podcast through their text-based audio editing and publishing features. And before this interview, I had the chance to test out this platform. I will say that it is exactly what it sounds like. It is easy. It is effortless. It is user-friendly. It is really what we need as podcasters and content creators who are only in the beginning stages of their podcast, only want to do audio. They don't want to throw all that fancy video in there. They don't want to do all the flashy lights. They just want to tell the story. This is the platform for you. While I want to give you a little bit of background on my friend Doomy, and I call him a friend because Doomy, and you'll see in this episode, he is just like the kindest, calmest, cool, and collected man that I've met in a while. And actually, I met him at a business plan pitch competition at Georgetown, where he is a recent graduate with his MBA, and just his energy, his confidence, how he got up on that stage, and he's really passionate about the work that he does. And so I'm calling him a friend. Dumi is originally from Zimbabwe, and he was inspired by the lack of diverse local stories in his home country and wanted to democratize podcasting by making the process easier for beginners. Like I said, Doomy is a recent graduate from Georgetown with his MBA, and he partnered with his co-founder, Paul Kassar, who has a background in software engineering, to create a user-friendly podcast editing platform. Their goal is to simplify podcasting for new content creators, helping them to focus on storytelling rather than getting bogged down by the technical details. And I just got to take a pause. Rather than getting bogged down by the technical details. That's huge because that's all that podcasting is. It's so technical. And for people who are like me and just want to tell a really great story, this kind of alleviates that stress so that you can continue to create your podcast effortlessly, streamlined, and all of the things. So super excited for you guys to hear my interview with Doomy today. But before we dive in, be sure to subscribe to the podcast on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your podcast. This is also a visual show, so be sure to check us out on YouTube as well. You can follow us on Instagram at A Bright Idea Podcast for updates on new episodes, behind the scenes content, and much more. If you are enjoying this show, please leave a review. It really helps spread the word. All right, let's get started. Dumi, thank you so much for joining A Bright Idea Podcast today. How are you doing, first off?
First and foremost, Amber, thank you so much for thinking of me and inviting me. I'm honored. And I'm doing great. Thank you.
Absolutely. So I was looking into, well, first, I want to back up and talk a little bit about your background. Something that I found very impressive was that you're from Zimbabwe, but you grew up in 5 different countries, which is
right.
Phenomenal. What do you think that did for your upbringing, growing up in all of those different places?
Great question. So, to your point, I come from Zimbabwe, which is wonderful, especially in its people. So brilliant, intelligent, hospitable, warm people. Unfortunately, I think it's a bit politically turbulent. So, what it often meant was that I moved around a bunch because of a lot of macroeconomic instability, for lack of a better word. So I lived, of course, I'm in the US now, but grew up in Zimbabwe, lived in Canada for a couple of years, moved back to Zimbabwe, then moved to high school in South Africa for boarding school, college in Scotland, back to Zimbabwe, South Africa again, and then the US. So it's like 5 countries, but kind of bouncing back and forth between a couple of them. But most of my time has been spent in Zimbabwe and South Africa before I came to the US. So I think what I think it did is kind of a global worldview, if I can call it that. So I feel very much, I guess, Zimbabwean. And sometimes you don't realize who you are until you have to leave where you're from. Mm-hmm. So sometimes you think, yeah, I'm American, but you're uncognizant of it until you live in another country. So I think when I left, I often felt a lot more Zimbabwean than I did when I was actually there. And yeah, I think I kind of had a really global worldview, but then also I'm just an observer of culture. So a lot of whether I write a book or doing a podcast or whatever it might be, I'm often watching culture or different cultures happening before me as an observer. So I'm always within and without at all times. So that's, I think, what it's given me.
And so you mentioned that when you went away to these places and then came back to Zimbabwe, you remembered who you were as Zimbabwean. And what does that mean to be Zimbabwean?
It's a feeling. I think I say it in the sense that obviously like borders are just artificial things. They aren't, I mean, even though they're not real, they are very real. And I think often I think every culture and every country has, I guess, a worldview, I would like to
Mhm.
call it, or a way of life in which they see the world. I think from my perspective, what Zimbabwean means, there's certainly, yeah, every country has its own things. I think Zimbabweans have a thing of being hardworking, I think is a big one. I would say resilience is a big one. Being hospitable is incredibly important. Down to earth, quite frankly, I think is one that kind of comes up. I wouldn't say like with the fanciest of, this is a big generalization, but I think we're just
Yeah.
really down to earth
Yeah.
people, as I find. So sometimes, let's say if I'm like in a really glitzy environment, I'm like, I always say to my wife, I'll be like, man, I'm just a boy from Harare, which is the capital city. It's just kind of, I wouldn't say it's just it's not a big city like New York City in
Yeah.
quote unquote terms. So, down to earth, hardworking, resilient, warm, hospitable. Um, yeah, that's what to me, that's what being Zimbabwean. And then also, I think the last thing I would say is the cognizance of being you are your brother's keeper or your like community.
Hmm.
Community is a big part of what it means to be Zimbabwean. It's not really individualistic, it's very much on togetherness. So I think that's, at least for me, that's what
Yeah.
Being Zimbabwean means for me.
What were you like as a child? Like, how would your parents have described you?
I think in many ways, I was always very active, sporty, super sporty all the time. Um, I don't want to say the word popular, but I think I've always been good with people.
Yeah.
I've always been good with people. I think it's the one, if there's one thing I think that I was born with is the ability to get along with people and be likable. So I've always been good with people and I've always had a lot of friends. Um, so I think I was, yeah, sporty, good with people, always had friends over. Also could be really extroverted, but also very introverted at the same time. So I'll
Hmm.
always be out there,
Hmm.
talking with my friends, being with people, but then I'll always just disappear in the middle of the day. When everyone's there, I'm like, nope, I just need to just recharge. I'll literally disappear as a kid for 2 hours
Hmm.
and come back. So yeah, I think that's one way of describing me, I think.
I think that's so fascinating because when you think about an entrepreneur, it's somebody that can connect with a lot of people. It's someone that is humble, but also confident. And I think that you exude all of those things. Did you know? I read that you grew up around a lot of entrepreneurs.
Yeah.
When you were young, being sporty and out with your friends and in school, did you have that in you that you were going to become an entrepreneur one day? What was it that you wanted to be?
I wanted to be an athlete. I played a lot of I played a lot of rugby growing
Okay.
up, which a sport I grew up playing a lot. So I really thoroughly enjoyed doing that. I still watch a ton, but my body just wouldn't hold up. So a lot of it. In fact, when I went to college in the UK, I was doing a lot of like I was doing school, but also playing a lot of rugby at the same time. But I had so many injuries and surgeries and so on. And then I think that was the first time I had to think, okay, what else can I do outside of, be a college athlete, for lack of a better expression. But to your point, I grew up around entrepreneurs. I mean, my parents entrepreneurs. Actually, my mom was an engineer chemical engineer by training. My dad was like a pilot, but they all, of course, turned entrepreneurs later on
Mm,
careers. When you look at my mom's sisters and her family, and my dad's brothers, they're all entrepreneurs. A lot of the time it's because the economy is tough, so you have to make a plan.
mhm.
But as a result, of course, the thing that I did for me, I always grew up just seeing it and
Yeah.
what. Not that I wanted to do it per se, but it was always being modeled before me, which I think has been my biggest blessing. Um, so with regards to me, how that kind of manifested with myself as getting into entrepreneurship, honestly, when I came back from college, I wanted to stay in the UK, but I couldn't get a visa, which meant I had to come back home.
Yeah.
When I came back home, I couldn't get it. It was just really difficult to get a visa to go to South Africa as well. So I had to move back to Zimbabwe, and it was difficult to get a job. So I kind of look back at that time as being a big blessing because I remember it's a bit of a story. So I remember I moved back home and I was kind of feeling like a bit of a failure, being like, man, I went to college. I should be I should have a job now. Like
Mhm.
I should have a job. We've sacrificed these 4 years to be here. I should have a job now. And I came back and I was just kind of like there, sitting with my family's home, being like, damn, I wish this wouldn't be me right now going through this situation. And then someone came over, I think I went to my aunt's house, and then they had just some family friends come over. And typically Zimbabweans are very spiritual. So one of the guys was like, do you want to say a prayer just before we go? I was like, okay, cool. Does anyone have any prayer requests? And then one of one my dad said, yeah, I actually have a prayer request. Just praying that Dumi gets a job. That's the prayer request. So he's like, okay, cool. So we all bow down and we pray. And then this guy, this pastor starts praying, and he prays. And then it's the first prayer. No one's ever prayed this for me before until that day. And then he says, look, we hope Dumi's back from university. And of course, we know young people want to get work and be productive, right? However, if that's not your will, empower him to be someone that can create jobs.
Mhm.
And no one's ever prayed that for me before. I haven't even prayed that for myself before. And he had said that prayer, and I remember saying amen, and me like, that's kind of random. I didn't think much about it, but I didn't really think too much about it.
Yeah.
I remember I look back at that day because now I've been in so many different startups. I remember like, that was the first day someone like asked of entrepreneurship being a thing. So eventually I couldn't get a job. Then a business opportunity opened up to start a manufacturing business. And that was kind of how I got into entrepreneurship. And then from then on, I think it's kind of gripped me since then.
Yeah, no, I'm happy that you took us on that journey, because I wanted to talk about that, in that you went off to school, you came back, and you couldn't find a job. And so I read that you had two business ideas essentially, and one was that you wanted to create a YouTube channel showcasing Zimbabwean inventors, and you were like, okay, let me put that idea to the side real quick, and I'm going to create this laundry soap business that you called Bright Care. What was that? It
Wow.
was called, was it Bright Care? Am I
Yeah,
right?
you've done your research. That's really impressive.
What was the decision making, and what was the fork in the road that you, it kind of seems like you took the product idea, which is in my opinion like the safe idea, but what was it about laundry soap that made you take that approach?
That's first, while I'm doing that research, you dug. I would say, I think maybe I'll go to answer your question directly. Um, yeah, at the time, so Zimbabwe didn't have, media was controlled by the state. So one party state is controlled by the state, I've told this story to many people. But in essence, what happened was that media wasn't decentralized. So YouTube was first becoming a thing. And I remember being like, wow, like this is, I mean, it seems like normal now, but the idea that we can record content and just publish it is mind blowing if you've been in an environment where media is controlled by either a big private company or by the state.
Mm-hmm.
I think for me, when YouTube was first becoming a thing and people were just publishing content, my mind was just completely blown.
Now, sorry, I want to interrupt you 1 second, because you've said that you've explained this story many times, but for the listeners who haven't heard it, that didn't know, I mean, coming from
Yeah,
America, I mean, there was a time where TV wasn't even censored. You could like turn to a channel and be seeing something as a kid you're not supposed to be watching, and you're coming from a place
right.
where you didn't even have like local, media. Can you explain that time period, and like the restriction that holds on like information gathering and just everything as a whole?
Yeah, I think often repressive governments do it as a way of controlling narratives. So, for example, they'll ban journalists from coming into a country so that they can control narratives that are coming in and out of a country that are being told, etc. So, at least where I come from, that was the case. It was during a time where there was significant hyperinflation, like economy was going crazy, and then in addition, media was being controlled and typically by the state, right? So, and if you wanted to get a TV license, it was very limiting. So it's quite fascinating now what technology has become. Where I mean, now of course we can publish stuff on Instagram and it goes live and it can be seen in um, Qatar and people
Mm-hmm.
watch that. But that's normal now. But it wasn't always like, I mean, for me. So I think for me it was like we had the local, which is called ZBC, the local broadcasting Zimbabwe Broadcasting Corporation. They had one channel. They ended up acting another one called Joy TV, but there was just two channels. Then there were what we called DSTV, which was a South African company, and they would publish stuff like they would show different things like Nickelodeon, um, global stations. So I
Mm-hmm.
ended up watching. I grew up really watching global media, and by global I mean for the most part American, British, South African, but not local.
Okay.
So the older I grew, I remember, and then I didn't really have a radio, so I just didn't have local stories, and I didn't think much of it. But as as I guess African content started becoming more prominent by virtue of YouTube and MTV Base became a lot more. I remember being like, wow, like what? You could just see a lot more African content was being produced,
Okay.
and it was so wild seeing yourself represented in media. I mean, it seems like a small thing, but seeing yourself or people like Nigerians were amazing at it. For example, Nigerians making like Afro beats and seeing that represent, I was like, wow,
Sure.
this is like I can see the wave happening, and it's purely because of technology. So, from my perspective, I was like, look, I don't have a job, but I think it would be a cool thing to create a show because all the media that comes out of where I come from is always about terrible inflation, starvation, people moving to South Africa to find jobs. That was always the narrative coming out. I said, okay, maybe I'll start like a little YouTube channel where I can interview people. Like I see some people who are doing great things, and I think it's good to tell both stories. But right
Yeah.
now, I'm only hearing one perspective, and that was the thing. But of course, it's kind of really far fetched. I mean, you're there, and it's like you're 22, and so my friend is like, look, let's. My friend goes like, no, his name is Tapiwa. He says, let's do it. I'll organize a camera. We can do this thing, and we got the camera, and then I got a couple of guests, and then obviously this was in a time where there was remote recording. You had to physically go and do in-person recording, and the day of the recording, the camera got stolen. So it was like
Oh my God.
that. So to answer, it's a long way of answering your question, but essentially the camera got stolen, and I'm like, well, I
Well,
guess
now let's go sell some soap.
let's go sell some. The camera got stolen, and I'm like, well, that's what you're gonna do, right? So the camera got stolen. So then, the nugget was my intuition was like, you're interested in making content. That was the intuition back then. But of course, then you say, okay, what's something more practical that I can sell in this economy when the disposable income of certain people is like really limited. Some people earn like $200-300 a month, so you can't sell cupcakes,
Mm-hmm.
or you can't sell like. I mean, there'll be a certain demographic of things. There's certain things you can sell, but it's a small market. But if you sell people who sell necessities, cooking oil, sugar, salt, flour, bread,
Mm-hmm.
very, very well because everyone needs those things in cash strapped economies. So for us, laundry soap was being imported, but there was an incredible shortage of it.
Mm.
Um, and so my parents owned a business where they were disposing of this waste byproduct, which is the main raw material for soap. So they're throwing away this raw material for like months at a time. And then like, oh my God, I can't believe we're throwing away this raw material,
Mm.
which is actually a main input to soap. And there's a big demand for laundry soap in this market. What if, as opposed to throwing away this stuff every day with our trucks that we own, we just use it to set up a factory where we make soap, and then you can start a soap business. So it really wasn't really my idea. It was just an opportunity, which was like, okay, I mean, I'm not doing anything. Starting a company is like not something I envision doing, but I think it could be an interesting challenge to take on. And that's kind of how I got into that. It was purely a means of, oh, there's an opportunity. The product makes sense given the environment.
Yeah.
Then we went about doing it. And I kid you not, if I had drugs, I couldn't have sold them that quickly. We sold, it was ridiculous. Like soap sells.
Now tell
It's
me about this soap. So you had like this material. What is it made of?
it's so cooking oil manufacture. It's made out of, so soya bean manufacturing is
Okay.
like is a cooking oil. So soybean cooking oil is a big type of cooking oil people make, but manufacturers in making it, there's a byproduct called soap stock. So it's kind of, yeah, it's like a byproduct of cooking oil manufacturers' waste.
Okay.
But it's good for like a laundry soap bar. So in Africa, they have like these 1 kilogram bars of soap. It's not just like powder, but it's like long. And most people don't have washing machines. Like the people who I was selling to, they didn't have washing machines, so they wash by hand.
Yeah.
So you're saying, okay, there's this big market of people who need to, wash their clothes, they don't have washing machines, and then there's this raw material that we can just, as opposed to throwing it away, we just move it here.
Yeah.
And then we have to buy a machine, build the machine, set up a factory, hire staff, and I was running that.
That is incredible. And it wasn't a small business because, I mean, it was a small business, but you were making, I mean, I think I read that you had an annual revenue of $200,000 that you were making off of this soap.
Yeah, and I think the reason why I think it did pretty well, at least from a revenue perspective, was because if you are a retailer, you need certain products in your stores.
Yeah.
Like if Safeway say, oh, we have no milk going forward. Like no one's coming to Safeway anymore. They're going to go down the road elsewhere. So there's certain products you can actually sell at a loss, but having them in your store helps sell other goods within the store. So it was like an anchor product.
Yeah.
So sometimes like we would even sell soap before making it. Would say, okay, give us a prepayment, and they would pay us 5,000 units up. It was in high demand, and we were able to, of course, get cheap raw material because it was being wasted elsewhere. So we could sell it significantly. So to answer your question, yeah, I mean, people wanted it, we're selling a lot of it, but ultimately, and I learned a lot. It was difficult to manage people. I was 22, and it was really hard. But I think it taught me a lot about entrepreneurship not being like the sexy thing that it seems like on the outside. It's pretty challenging. And but I think ultimately the business failed because we couldn't scale it. The raw material dried up. From the manufacturers got a lot more efficient in managing their waste, which meant we couldn't get enough inputs to make the product. Even though people were willing to pay, we couldn't have enough material. Then you say, okay, well, maybe we import this raw material. But then once you import it, the landed cost becomes uneconomical.
Okay.
So it was kind of a classic case of jumping into a business without really understanding the business and its fundamentals well. So I think that was a key thing. It's like you must first understand your business, its levers, its supply chain. And if there's a shortage of soap, why is there a shortage? Why, think a lot more about those type of things. But I learned a lot over those 2 years about.
Yeah. All right, guys, can I get a little personal with you real quick? A few months ago, I turned 30 years old, the big 3-0. My whole life, I've loved birthdays. I love big parties and new memories with friends and family and opportunities. I never really thought about the number or what the next year could look like until this year, when something about turning 30 stopped me in my tracks, and I decided it was time to get a little serious. I started to reevaluate a lot of things in my life, what I wanted to do with my time, what I wanted to achieve in my personal life, what kind of woman I wanted to become. And I thought to myself, one of the first things I need to do is get my money right. Gratefully, I grew up in a household where we had conversations about money around the dinner table. Discussions about the stock market, debt, 401k, financial independence. No topic was off limits. I thought I was in a good place managing my own money until I started planning my future, and I had no clue where to begin. This made me turn to a financial advisor. Working with a financial advisor has been an enlightening journey that has brought me incredible value in more ways than I initially anticipated. Having a dedicated advisor taught me a discipline around finances that I hadn't experienced before, challenging me to prioritize my goals and align my spending with what truly matters. I've also come to better appreciate the worth of my time, realizing that how I spend both my time and my money directly impacts my long-term success. One of the most empowering aspects of working with a financial advisor has been learning strategies and techniques to make my money work for me. These are concepts that we just don't learn in school. From tax optimization to investment strategies and retirement planning,
I've gained insights that I could have never developed on my own. Having someone guide me through complex financial decisions has been far more beneficial than trying to handle everything myself. With a financial advisor's expertise, I've been able to approach financial independence with clarity and confidence, knowing that I have a trusted partner who understands my aspirations and can help me make informed choices. Chosen Advisory Group caters to the ambitious, the established mid-career professionals, and those on the cusp of retirement who recognize the dedication required to attain financial independence. With their experience and clear professional guidance, you can transform your financial goals into a reality. Life is stressful. Money should not be. Begin your journey to financial clarity. You can schedule your complimentary consultation at www.chosenadvisorygroup.com today.
So, I mean, backing up a little bit, you were only 22 years old when you started this business. And you mentioned that you sold in local retailers, wholesalers, and remote communities. What did the failure of that business feel like at that time for you?
Oh, oof. Man, you're taking me back. It was really difficult. It was very challenging because it felt like even though I've come back from college and I've found a thing to do and I've built a business and I'm paying salaries, and the challenge was like, I felt like I'd failed. I mean, the business did fail, but I also felt like I felt like a failure, to be specific. I felt like a failure because my whole life, I think I've been very lucky. I've got great education. I've been given great education, great opportunities. And I think I've just wanted to just do well and return all of the opportunities and investment that people have, poured into me, right? Mm-hmm. So coming back from college, not having anything to do, then finding something to do, I gave it everything I had to do the best with it. But then when it didn't work out the way in which I envisioned, I felt like, damn, like at what point is it going to like happen for me,
Mm-hmm.
So
how long did you feel that way?
I would say like 4 months, 4 months, I would say. Yeah.
What was it? 4 months. It takes some people like years. What was it that like brought you back out of that?
No, why? Because I think the way in which I bounced back from that loss into like the next opportunity really kind of gave me like a new lease on life.
Mm.
I think it's humbling. It's kind of humbling to be like, wow, I have this business. I've started it. I've grown it to a particular point, but now I have to shut it down again. And it's also painful. People have making salaries off this. Now I have to like lay everyone off. It's like a hard thing to go to at 24, being like, damn, this is not what I envisioned for anyone that was involved in this. So that I said, follow me and we can make this thing happen, right? But I think the new lease on life was like, okay. And also I was staying at home at the time. So like you want to keep your costs low, you're staying at home. So you just feel like, oh, I'm 24. Like, what are we doing? My friends are traveling the world. I'm just here in Harare trying to hustle. And this is not what I saw. Mm-hmm. So I think what happened, after that was I got a really great job at a startup in South Africa that I was just been following for years before. It was a real estate development company. And I got a really great job offer there. And yeah, it was just like, it felt like how a 5-year-old should be living. You have your own apartment, you get a cool startup, opportunity to earn good money and not be like stressed all the time. And I also went to high school in South Africa. So it kind of felt like a homecoming where I'm back where I went to high school. I'm in a nice environment, got my own apartment. It just felt like a nice bounce back. So yeah. I think I was like, okay, if I didn't have that, if I didn't go through that, I wouldn't be in this new phase. So I think I was thankful in the end that I had a new opportunity to start again. So 4 months.
No, I love that. So Johannesburg was your starting over period. Yeah. You went to go on to work with ventures in the I think it is like the affordable housing space, focusing on serving inner city college students. Yeah. And then there was another one. It was like an incubator solar company provider in Johannesburg. And so I'm curious now, working in a startup and working with a team of people. And this, I was reading that this essentially led you or inspired you to go back and get your MBA. What was it
Yeah.
about that experience that you were like, I think I'm going to go back to school?
So I moved back to South Africa, and I was working with a lot of really bright people and in cool startups that were doing really great work. And that was, of course, very inspiring. But then also, I'd had experiences running a business for 2 years, and I knew what my gaps were. Because often you don't know what your gaps are until you're under pressure and you have to put yourself in a challenging situation.
Mm-hmm.
So I knew, okay, there's certain skills that there are certain ways in which I can grow and learn from certain people. So the first company I worked for, a really great developer who was young and very ambitious and like just had a worldview that was very limitless. Like I'd never seen someone engage with the world with like there were no limits. It was kind of so being exposed to people like that was great. And then, and I kind of after leaving that company, I got a job offer to kind of start another business with a group of people in South Africa. And then similarly, that group of people, incredibly smart, incredibly hardworking. And one of them, of course, did their MBA at Stanford. So you're kind of like being exposed to these people that are really effective at what they do. And you can just tell that they're operating at a different level of expertise given their training, whether that's through consulting or whether that's through their MBA or exposure to things and people that I hadn't been exposed to. So I think a big thing in life in general, I think just being exposed to like people that are really efficient and good at what they do. I think it kind of inspires you to also be like, man, I want to be competent in what I want to do, and being exposed to them kind of helps that. So I think being in those environments, seeing what it was like and how they were approaching the business, I was like, man, if I'd had this mindset then, it would have just like been a night and day in the way in which I ran my business versus it would have been night and day. So I remember being like, okay, clearly it's not just about starting a business. Often it's just about information.
Yeah.
The big thing is exposure and information. So I kind of had that nugget, and you just watch these people work. You're like, wow, just even from how they run a meeting, just running a meeting. If you've been in an inefficient meeting, you won't even know. But once you've seen an efficient meeting, then you're like, wow, okay. Information exposure to excellence kind of just opens your mind up to like what life can be and who you can be. So that was kind of very inspiring. And then so when I was in South Africa, I met a beautiful girl who's from the United States, who's now my wife, and we were both wanted to apply to grad school because we had been there for 5 years and we're ready for the next. We fell in love. She was doing the Peace Corps, and we were both like, okay, let's apply to grad school. And I think her dad was also an MBA teacher. He went to Columbia, but he was just now teaching as an MBA teacher in Florida. And he said, I think you would really do well at an MBA. Then I'm like, what? I never envisioned doing an MBA. I just saw people who had done it doing well, but I never thought it was a thing for me per se. No, it was just a thing that was, people did, and I didn't think I was a person to do one. I just saw, wow, that thing looks pretty cool, but I never owned it for myself as a thing. But I think it was my father-in-law who was like, dude, I think you'd be really good at an MBA. I think you would really thrive in that environment. I think you should really consider it and go for it. So I think sometimes also it takes people to tell you who watch you from afar and kind of see how you think and see what can help you grow. And I guess that was like the spark. And I was like, okay, well, if we're both applying to grad school, where should we apply? And then that kind of snowballed. So it was exposure and someone just suggesting, I can see how you think. I think this can really help you. And those are the two things.
It's so interesting because I feel like people see something in you that you don't yet see in yourself. It's such a cliche statement, but it is so true. And so I was curious too, what sort of strengths did you see in yourself? And then what were some of the weaknesses or what was the strengths in the people that you were working with who had their MBAs that you saw as maybe like a weakness or something that you needed to work on?
Yeah, I think for me, strengths, it's always been my thing, hard work and discipline. I think I have a natural, well, at least I think this is my perspective of myself. I think I have a natural ability to get along with people, which I think comes from my dad. Very likable, very, people love him. So natural ability to get along with people, and I really like people. I think people are awesome. So I think that's always been natural, but I think the thing that I've had is discipline and hard work, being very hardworking, very disciplined, and bringing a rigor to, like, even if my execution or training wasn't there, you could always tell nobody works hard. You can't deny it. He works hard, he's disciplined, he wakes up early, he puts in the hours. That's, you can't take away. So I think the thing that I lacked, to answer your question, was training. So I have, obviously there's degree, but workplace training is a different thing. It's a completely different thing. And I think maybe it's one of the things where in-person work, I think, was really helpful. In, like, working in person with people that had good training, and they in turn trained me about how to be better at things, was, I think, really did wonders for me. But I think even still, you can learn that on the job, but you can tell, like, just certain skills like financial modeling, as an example, or approach to entrepreneurship and hypothesis testing, and just the information about their training, resources about information, but then also network.
Mm-hmm.
Like, a lot of the guys the startup that we're working at, they raise money from, they had Delaware C Corps and raise money in the West Coast. I'm just like, how are you guys all doing this? Like, it's just different, right? It was just completely different, but it was good to be exposed to it, to say, oh, okay, this is how it's done. This is how if you're trained and you have access to networks, you can make certain moves that are hard to do alone.
Yeah.
So I would say it's, just hard skills. I have the soft skills and the hard work, but hard skills, like, those needed to be sharper. And that's what it was.
Okay, so you decided to go to Georgetown to get your MBA. And was this because your now wife also attended Georgetown?
Yeah.
Were you looking anywhere else, or why Georgetown for your MBA?
Also, well, two things. She applied to one school and she was like laser sharp.
Yeah.
I applied to 5. Well, actually, no, let me back it up a little bit. I applied over 2 rounds. I think people don't always aren't always fully transparent. So I applied over 2 rounds. The first year I applied, I didn't get in because it was like, well, I just didn't get in. I'm not going to make it. I didn't get in. Like, it was tough year. Everyone was going to business schools during COVID. Tough application cycle. Didn't get in. So that was really challenging. So I applied again So I applied to 5 schools. Didn't get into any. In the following year, I applied to just 2, and I got into Georgetown. And then I think also the second time I applied, the first time I was writing from a perspective of what I thought they wanted to see in a candidate. Like, does that make sense? You're writing from who you think a person wants. And the second year I said, you know what? I'm going to just write as who I am, as what I actually want to do. And if if it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out. That was it. So yeah, I applied twice, got in the second time, and it was great.
So you mentioned during COVID, everyone was applying to business schools and everyone was in lockdown and really trying to figure out what they were going to do in life. And so while you were deciding to go back to school, you also thought it would be a great idea to circle back to that first idea that you had, which was the YouTube channel. And during that time, and I remember during that time because I was in grad school as well, and there was this surge in podcasts. I mean, podcasts had been around for, podcasts are not new, let's be clear. But everyone in the pandemic was like hopping on the microphone and telling their stories. And you were one of those people. Take me down that path. And what led you to Zimbabwean Voices, which was your podcast?
I think pain from not getting into school the first time. I think sometimes pain is always a great place to birth new, authentic ideas in a weird, strange way. So every business startup and so on that I'd been in, if you think back, it was never my idea. It was always someone else's idea or an opportunity, and then I kind of just jumped on that. So I think, honestly, the one idea I did have that was truly mine was that YouTube, YouTube channel all those years ago before the camera got stolen. So I think I was really frustrated by, I guess, trying to apply to school from a perspective of who I thought. I think I was maybe doing things from a perspective of who I thought school wanted me to be, or people thought you're doing things from that perspective rather than from like just being authentic, being
Sure.
truly authentic, right? Not that you're inauthentic, but just being truly authentic. So for me, I was like, well, I'm not applying to business school again. I'm done. All I want to do now is in the pandemic, I want to just make this podcast just for me. It was just really a thing a hunch I wanted to just go for, given that I had it before. And I was like, I think now is the time for it. Before my camera got stolen, but now I got a laptop. There's this thing called Zoom, and we can do it remotely, and there's literally nothing that can stop me. So I don't know. I don't think there was an intention to do anything with it. It was just purely, I want to tell these positive stories, and I think I have the tools to do it now.
Mm-hmm.
And there's this medium that makes it slightly more, I guess, slightly easier to do it than before. And that was kind of the thing. It was telling positive stories about my community. I still thought that I could see more, especially amongst people that were my age.
Yeah.
And, that's what I did. And it was great. So great.
I love that. You spoke earlier about the stories of Zimbabwe are oftentimes about inflation, starvation, and moving to South Africa for, better opportunities. But you really took the approach to share the positive stories in the narratives that you wanted to see. And I really loved, I was listening to one of the episodes where someone was interviewing you about why you started the podcast. And you were talking about diversity within being Zimbabwean and how you really wanted to amplify those voices. Can you talk a little bit about just give us a little bit of an idea of what the premise of the show was and then some of the people that you interviewed?
Yeah. The premise of the show was to balance. If I look at a scale, like a scale, there's always balance. So I felt like there was an imbalance of stories, some negative, some positive, as you say. So the premise was, how can we just focus on telling positive stories?
Mm-hmm.
There's so many negative, and that's fine. I think it's important to have those stories there, but if there's an imbalance, there's an issue. So the premise was just focusing on positive stories to try and maybe tip that scale a little bit.
Yeah.
In my own small and unique way. So, but of course, when you look at, I guess, content in general, it's typically maybe just on one racial demographic or maybe one socioeconomic demographic but it's really difficult at the same time it's very difficult to capture a broad socioeconomic and racial demographic, but that's what I was always trying to do where possible. Yeah. So different races, different genders, some people with special needs, some people without, and trying to capture. I mean, I think I did one show with like a girl who was great, who speaks sign language, right? And that was one thing that we had to get an interpreter and get that perspective. Cool. So it was truly just about getting diverse perspectives on people doing great stuff in a place that is supposedly always going through it. Mm-hmm. And that was famous.
Who was like your target audience, and like how did you grow the podcast while still in the pandemic? How did people find out about it?
I was such a novice. I don't even think I had a target audience like that. I wasn't thinking about it like this is my target audience. I was not even thinking about it like that. I just truly just wanted to interview people and hear their stories and help share them. That's really all that I wanted to do.
Yeah.
And I think as it evolved, people that were listening, it was kind of random. Like Zimbabweans are across the world. So sometimes you look at your analytics, you see someone like Poland or like some wild part of the world being like, wow, that's really, people are listening out there. But essentially it ended up being, people from around the world, typically Zimbabwe, South Africa, UK, some people in America, because Zimbabweans are across the world, or some people, which was interesting, that weren't Zimbabwean, but because they get the essence of the show, they're like, oh, I feel the same as a Cambodian, or I feel the same as a X country, or as a Haitian, and that's why I listen, because I can see what you're getting at, the essence of the. So that was really cool. So how I'll grow it, I think, I don't even know if the show, what the intention was to grow it. It was purely just expression and sharing and hearing, right? So I think, and the more in which I would produce, I would interview a bunch of people. And I was also learning on the fly, calling my friend Marissa to like, Marissa, what do I do now? She's like, you have to promote it. Oh, okay. Where do I promote it? You have to go on Instagram, and then you have to go on Facebook. Oh, okay. Then I'll just go on social media to promote it that way. I also had a website. Now I'll distribute it through my own website and blog. there as well.
Mm-hmm.
And then you look at the traffic, you're like, wow, is that getting traffic in India? Like, it was just so
Yeah.
odd looking at the data, being like, who's watching this stuff? This is so weird. And that's kind of how I went about it. It was kind of just trial and error, the whole time. Purely trial and error.
It's so interesting too, because I think in the pandemic, when people were in lockdown, it really was, a lot of these ideas did come from self-expression, not originally as an idea to grow revenue or grow an audience, but really to just tell stories that they haven't heard already. And I find it, I also, as a podcaster, find it very fascinating that sometimes, we're speaking to these people and it feels like it's speaking to a person through a screen, and it feels like whatever we're talking about is going to this dark void on the internet. But then you do see people from like Poland or England, and you're like, wow, I'm really hitting somebody. Like, this is really cool. And so I can really identify with that, because I feel the same way. You reached 35 episodes, which is not anything. That's a lot. That's a lot of episodes.
Sure.
Yeah. I mean, I'm almost at 35, and I am like, can I keep going? Like, I'm like, this is harder than I thought. And so it's fascinating to me, because I was reading about your experience with podcasting, and by 35 you were like, oh my god, I feel burnout, and you actually used the term pod fade, which I had never heard before, but I'm going to start using every day now, because that's what I feel. But there was this interesting statistic, though, that said that research demonstrated that 75% of podcasters quit after only 3 episodes, and 90% of podcasters do not reach 20 episodes. Well, you exceeded that. You had 35. But it was because of how strenuous it was to edit and publish the episodes, correct? Which was the burnout for you.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. I think I'll speak later about what that then inspired later on, but I think it was because of I'd been working at a startup before, and what we did was I was managing the sales process. And essentially what was happening was, a lot of the time when we first started the startup, every sales process was like manual. I have to like email there was no automation in the actual process of our sales funnel. But in essence, when we automated all of those tasks, I remember being like, wow, I feel so much lighter. And I was the main sales. I just felt so much like lighter. And then it was like, oh, and then it taught me a lesson that, okay, when you automate repetitive tasks, it kind of frees up your cognitive load. So I think for me, the reason why I was like, oh, and maybe it's like, eventually you realize it's the same. Generally, the 80% of the tasks are more or less the same that are being done every single time, but we're doing them manually every single time. So I think for me, I felt a lot of pod fade, because I was doing these same manual tasks, and I was like, geez, all of this stuff is taking like hours to do, but it's the same task that I'm doing. I have a job, I have things to do. So that's kind of what I felt.
Most people give up and just don't, or maybe they hire somebody to do all of the editing. But even then, you still, I mean, I have an editor, and I still have to listen and go back and give feedback. And can you fine tune this, bring the audio down here? You stopped doing your podcast, but you didn't give up. You found a solution, which was Shanda Studios.
Yes.
Talk to us about that.
Yeah, I think I wanted to keep the podcast going, but I was a student, so I'm like, man, I want to be conscious with my money, so I can't just be outsourcing it for like X amount of dollars per episode. I want to just be cost conscious, but I still want to tell these stories, because I think it's important, and that's really what I wanted to do. But I was like, look, if during an MBA I can't sustain this, I can't sustain all these tasks that I have to do to make this production, with all these other things that are happening at the same time. So I was thinking about the problem a lot, like just thinking about like, well, if I was to go about making this easier, how would I go without outsourcing it? I was thinking about the problem. And then at school, they would have this thing called chalk talks, where you just go and like, if you have a problem, you can just go and you just talk to someone about it. It's like, I just feel like there's a lot of friction in this particular thing that I'm doing. Oh, okay, well, have you read a book called The Lean Startup? And I was like, no, what is that? So, oh, just go read the book called The Lean Startup and then come back to me. And then I listened. So I read the book, The Lean Startup. Then I was like, interesting. And it really gave me like a really methodical way of breaking down and distilling problems into like steps that you can test and improve. So essentially I had the problem, read the book, then I had a kind of a framework through which I can refine my problem. And then for months, I just kind of started slowly being like, well, if I was to solve this problem, how would I go about doing it? And then long story short, after many iterations, and we're still iterating now, created a startup called Shanda Studio that essentially aims right now to simplify podcast editing tasks. And thankfully also the timing was phenomenal because I think AI came out at the same time.
Yes.
We use, of course, AI and technology, and that kind of helps simplify these tasks that were pretty previously manual and helps automate them. So it's kind of like the problem was there, but also the timing was fantastic because this new tech, I remember, so I had the problem, but when the tech came, I was like, this is it. This is going to solve my problem. And then obviously marrying the problem with some of this tech that we have has been a really fun journey and one that continues to unravel. So yeah, that's kind of what we did. And I can go deeper into like that, but
yeah. No, I want to get into how it works, how you built this in a second, but I want to go back to I want to take a little step back just for a second, because in just listening to your journey, and in the beginning, I asked you how you would describe yourself as a child, but also being from Zimbabwe. And one of the things you said was a collectivism versus individualism. And I think about entrepreneurship a lot, as especially being here in the United States and American, it's very individualistic. We think that we come up with this idea and we're all on our own. And throughout your path, you weren't on your own. You had your family helping you with the soap. Then you went to Johannesburg and you were working with this team of people in this startup. And then you had this community at Georgetown to back you. How can you talk to me about how you built your team to bring Shanda Studios into fruition, and how important having people behind you and working together helps further a goal?
Yeah. I mean, no man is an island. Like, I'm trying to think of a poignant African proverb I can throw in just to...
Please do. Please. We need the proverbs.
Maybe I can say what? I am Ubuntu, or who I am because we are. Like, that's a central African, like I am because we are. So I can only succeed if we are succeeding. So I think with any company, any endeavor, I mean, even just growing up as you can't Amber can't be the grown woman that she is without the help of people that have made her get to where she is, right? And that comes with help and support. And I think in many ways, we're really here on earth to try and help each other. Obviously to make things and to have a good life, but really we've got to help each other. So I think for me, even though of course they say America is quite individualistic, I've found the Georgetown community incredibly, well, truly a community. The entrepreneurship community especially was truly a community. I mean, from when I had the problem to help thinking through the problem, to having interns to help build, at least do research with me, because a lot of it I was doing by myself, but then eventually I'm like, I can't do it alone. Let me try and get interns. And I did a school-based accelerator called Georgetown Ventures. Then they gave me 3 interns. Like, here's your part of your team, go do some work. Then of course, work at the venture lab where they can help incubate your business. They gave me some money. Here's $10,000 to help build a prototype. Like, I had help. I still have help. I still have help at every single. And I'm often always humbled to be like, man, I just feel like the facilitator of this idea that aims to empower people and how they express their voices and tell stories with the world. But I think the most beautiful thing about that is every small, I was thinking about this before this interview, like, man, there's so many people that have lended a hand along the way. And I think anyone who's going after a dream, I think feels like they're going about it alone, but you'll be very surprised how many people are willing to just like give you an hour, even you giving your time to just have this conversation. You're helping a hand as well. So I've been incredibly blessed throughout my life. And thanks for kind of reminding me about that I've had so many people that have helped me every day.
So I actually, you're talking about community and how your users use your platform. And I spoke with you prior to this interview and was honored to answer some questions about how I use podcasting and how I edit. Can you walk us through how this platform works and some of the features that your users can use by utilizing your platform?
Yes, absolutely. So essentially, imagine I have a voice memos app. You might have an iPhone. I have a voice memos app, or I have Zoom. We've all used Zoom before, and I think it's important that we tell stories about female entrepreneurship, as an example. So I do a bunch of Zoom recordings, or I do a bunch of recordings with female entrepreneurs on my voice memos app, as an example. Then I have these digital file, MP3 or M4A, etc. Then I go www.shanda.studio, SHANDA.studio. I just sign in, and then I simply literally upload. The first thing I just do is upload that file to a dashboard. Click upload, you upload that file, then you wait. Then what we've done is we've done hours and hours of research to figure out what are the main 4 macro tasks that are being done before you get your recording from, of course, speaking it to sharing it with your audience. Like, what are the main tasks that need to be done? And what you find is typically you have to cut out certain words, or you have to remove background noise and things of that nature. And that's the first thing that has to be done. Secondly, there'll be a thing around, hey, here's my intro. This is Amber Key's podcast. You might do an intro music or an intro introduction to your particular podcast with music. And you have to bolt those 2 on to the main file. Then the audio is done. In addition, you might have to write about your podcast. So this is like the 3rd step, which is like, hey, this is the title of this recording that we just did, or this is the image of the actual recording that we had, like the thumbnail for the show. So we've automated a lot of those tasks. We've made the editing super simple, like editing a Word document. We've automated like the uploading of the intro and the outro music. We've automated the copywriting so that you don't have to write everything yourself. Made it simple to upload your image. And then finally, the last step is to just review everything. Then the feature we're working on now is just a 1 button. You can just publish to Spotify or Apple Podcasts, or wherever it is that you want to publish. So essentially, the goal has been, how can we reduce the steps or provide the steps up front without you having to think about them every time? And the main things we want to add, but for now, it's simplifying the steps so that you can do it quickly and in an intuitive way. And that's essentially how it works.
Have you timed how long it takes to edit an episode?
So I would say, it depends on how much content in there, but I would say probably you can edit in 5 minutes.
That's incredible. Because you know how long it takes me?
How long does it take you?
Well, my attention span's not great, so I give myself like 2 days, but 5 minutes sounds incredible. We love that.
Because typically what happens is that you have to always, when you aren't guided, you're always thinking, what do I have to do again? What do I have to do again? So it helps when someone gives you a guide.
Yes.
And I'm thinking, what is a good analogy for? Like, for example, let's say I'm gonna on the metro. I need to get from here to Noma. It's like, well, what are the stops between getting from here to Noma are? That makes sense. I have to take the red line, and there's stop 1, stop 2, stop 3. It's guided. But if you always have to be like, how do I get to Noma? I have to keep thinking about it. It's really confusing. So I think for us, the main thing was like, how can we guide people that I want to make? How can we guide you get from here to your listener through simplifying the steps and making it intuitive and fun and happy during that experience, rather than the traditional way in which it's done, and keep trying to get better at those steps and keep working to get better and better and better at making that simple, fun, happy to get you from A to Spotify or A to Apple Podcasts.
Yeah. So your platform is simple, fun, and happy. I love those 3 words. Who is this for? It's for the beginner, right?
Yeah, exactly. So I think we had a lot of struggle with this because typically it's always for the beginner, but beginner is such a big word. Like everyone's a beginner at something in the beginning, right? So I think when we launched, we were like, we're going to just reach out to a bunch of beginners in different industries. But then what we found was people that were using, and now we have paid users, were college students. Because what you find is that college students use tools called Audacity, which is like the main one that they, especially undergrads, but yeah, mainly undergrads, maybe graduate students are like from 18 to 24. But typically they can't afford to outsource because they aren't working yet. But so they have to kind of have a constrained budget. But the alternative are, let's say, Audacity is a typical tool, or GarageBand is what they're kind of using right now, or iMovie. But iMovie, of course, doesn't do all of these automations that we're saying. So the people that were using it, engaging with it, and giving us feedback and paying were college students. So for us, what we're going to focus on is the market we're going to focus on right now is college students. They're underserved, and it's a big market. And we think we have a perspective because we were I was a college student not just a few weeks ago. So I still have a lot of resources there. And I think the goal is to just really focus on that market and serving that market well before going to other beginner markets, if I can call it that. So
yeah,
it's for college students right now.
And what is the price to use Shanda Studios?
Shanda is $11.99. It's $11.99, so super affordable. Typically, and $11.99 is unlimited access to it. You can still use it for free to kind of familiarize yourself with the platform, to make sense of how it works, to try it. But if you want unlimited access, you can do it for $11.99. Yeah, traditionally, if you want to outsource it for your editing, it's kind of like $58 above. So it's pretty expensive to outsource. But for us, I'm taking in my manufacturing background. It's about how can if I'm producing something, I want to have a fixed cost rather than like a variable. Because if I keep paying a variable cost, every time I produce, it gets more expensive. So for us, how can we give you something that's fixed? The more you produce, the more affordable technically your product becomes. And in addition, it's a factory should be simple, automated, and your costs should be fixed. So I have to say a lot of my background experiences and how things should be run are all kind of still coming into, I'm just bringing manufacturing expertise into this business right now. So yeah, $11.99, and that's how it works.
How many current users do you guys have now?
Just under 200. Okay. And what we found was really great feedback. But I think what's been helpful now is we've just finished we're in the middle of now doing our second iteration, which is they were saying, hey, it needs these more features. If you have the XYZ feature, we'll definitely convert those, 200 into like maybe 50 paying users rather than just like the few that we have right now. So
what are those features?
It's certain things that are really about audio editing, like removing background noise and like simplifying removing background noise, or simplifying, like sometimes people want to remove things of those like filler words, and doing that in a way that's like click of a button as opposed to having to like scroll through, click everything, just click find it and it does everything for you. So it's automating a lot of the audio components, as well as maybe giving more options for music, intro, outro music, etc., etc. So a couple of those small little design changes that need to be added in.
Yeah. I think that it's fascinating because just, we talked about earlier in the pandemic, everyone had started their podcasts, and just from 2020 to 2024, what people's idea of podcasts have changed. So we went from like audio only to now video. There's in-person podcasts, little clips on Instagram. Is there an opportunity? And I know like these things take time and there's baby steps, but is there opportunity for shorter promotable clips or video components down the pipeline?
Yes, for sure. Absolutely. I think video, of course, is definitely the future. I think for us right now, it's more, our main focus is, because we're focusing on college students right now, when you listen at the interesting user behavior is college students don't do video, which is interesting. They all do audio. So this is perfect for us right now. However, other people in other markets, of course, whether it's coaches or solopreneurs, they all use video like Riverside or so different customers, different market segments have different behaviors. But even in this day and age, despite everyone being on TikTok and so on, when you look at the podcast creators, they're all doing audio. So, but in the future, absolutely. Once we, I guess, master one market and then have enough money and revenue, etc., to now start focusing on other features, totally.
I want to pivot a little bit, but in all of the success that you've had thus far, and you're working on growing Shanda, if you could go back to your 22-year-old self, when you started your soap business, and it was kind of like, you know, the start of how you see yourself as an entrepreneur, like what would you say to yourself?
Trust yourself. Trust yourself. I think I only feel like I'm finding my entrepreneurial voice now. So I'm 32. I'm 30. Yeah, I'm only feel like I'm finding my entrepreneurial voice now, because a lot of the ideas that I had were often like weighing on other people's ideas, and that's good. Nothing wrong with that, because you learn a lot of skills and exposure to being with other people. But I think maybe sometimes at certain points there's maybe a lack of confidence to my authentic perspective. I was like a YouTube channel was such a far-fetched. It was unlike anything. I'd never done anything like that before. But my hunch was my intuition was like, I think we should do like a content, but it was so far-fetched.
Mm-hmm.
But now, 10 years later, look, we're doing something that's slightly adjacent to that initial hypothesis from years ago. So I think for me, the main thing, and obviously you only learn this with time and experience and through getting your fingers burned. But I think the thing that I'm most proud of now, and if I could say it again now, is like the ability to trust yourself and your hunches and intuition, and own them, because that's where I think your superpower is. Yeah.
I love that. Thank you so much for sharing your story. I'm really inspired by you and your determination and resilience and everything about your story. And this has been such a cool conversation.
Thank you so much, Amber, and I appreciate you having me. It's been wonderful, and I wish you all the best with the right idea.
Thank you. Before I let you go, I want to play a rapid fire game with you if you'll let me.
Let's do it.
Okay. Favorite country you've lived in thus far?
South Africa.
Is it because that's where you met your wife?
No, it's just, I think I went there when I was 12, and it's South Africa for me has always been a bit of a haven, in the sense that like when lots is going on, let's say it's like back in Zimbabwe, I'm so proud of where I come from, but let's say Zimbabwe is going through crazy hyperinflation, or it's a lot's going on. I go to boarding school in South Africa, and it's like super, or I'm in Zimbabwe, and like, let's say I've done this business and it's not working out, so I have to start again. I'm in Johannesburg, and then I get like, it's always been a haven for me. And it's always given to me. People have always been so wonderful to me. So it's not just the place, it's people. So it's a special place in my heart, South Africa. I think it's wonderful.
It's awesome.
Yeah.
The most memorable lesson you learned in entrepreneurship?
Everything is an experiment. Test. That's the most memorable one. Just hypothesis, test. That's it. And so I want to just add one other thing.
Sure.
You can't cheat this game. You have to work hard. You have to work hard. You can't cheat this game. You got to work hard. And then hard work plus testing, I think, gives you a shot at actually having a shot. But you got to work hard. You can't cheat it. So those two. I snuck that in there, but
no, that's a good one. Where can people find you when you're not working on your startup?
I love to work out. So I typically like to train early in the morning, which is my quiet time. So sometimes people are like, do you want to work out together? I'm like, not because I don't want to, but it's because it's the one time I get to just be myself, and I thoroughly enjoy it. So I like to work out. If not that, when I'm bored, I like to read. If not that, just being with friends. I love being with friends. Friends make life rich. So
no, that's a true statement. Fun fact about you.
Oh, I've always hated this question.
I know. I do too. I absolutely hate it. I'm like, I don't know.
Do I brag? No, I don't. I think I'm going to throw this in there because it's topical. Yeah, I wrote a book, which I think is a cool thing to say. I wrote a children's book, which was very fun to do. And I want to write in the future, not now, but in the future, when I have more time, I want to write more children's books. I think they're so fulfilling. So yeah, I'm a children's book author, and I have more manuscripts than they can, but I have to focus on one thing at a time. So yeah, I'm a children's book author.
No, I love that. I was recently back home visiting my family, and my parents have a nice little library that actually used to be my bedroom, but we won't talk about that. And all of my children my siblings and I, children's books are still in there. And it just like, it brings you back. And it just like, it's such an important time as an adolescent to like read those books.
So good.
Yeah.
So good.
I love that. Okay. Lastly, where can people find you?
Ooh, physically or digitally, or both? Both.
Both, yes. Both. And Sean, and how can people use Shanda Studios?
Yes, absolutely. Please. So, as a company, www.shanda.studio, you can find us there. Please, we're still working on the new iteration, so we'd love to get your feedback on what you think should be better. We love feedback. You can find us online, also at Instagram at shanda.studio, at LinkedIn at shanda.studio. You can find me on Instagram at Dumi Mabhena, on LinkedIn at Dumi Mabhena as well. That's DUMI space MABHENA. Yeah, that's where you can find me. Also, but just to reiterate, it's not just me alone. I do this with a team. They're wonderful. I have a wonderful co-founder as well, who's amazing. And yeah, it's a team effort. So I'm just blessed to be the custodian of this team. But yeah, it's a team effort for sure.
Awesome. Thank you so much for your time. This is great.
Thank you so much, Amber. Take care.
That wraps up today's episode of A Bright Idea. I want to give a huge thanks to Doomy for sharing his insights and expertise on Shanda Studio. It is such an eye-opening conversation. I hope that you found it inspiring and thought-provoking. If you have a podcast, if you want to start one, or if you're just curious, you can go to shanda.studio to check out the incredible platform that Doomy and Paul are creating. If you enjoyed today's episode, please be sure to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out on future episodes. You can also follow us on Instagram at A Bright Idea Podcast for more updates, behind the scenes content, and highlights from today's conversation. And remember, we love hearing from you. If you have questions, ideas, or a story you'd like us to cover, please feel free to reach out. I love DMs. I love emails. I love text messages. I even love snail mail. So if you have any ideas, if you have any great feedback, if I've inspired you or a guest has inspired you in any way, please hit me up. Please. Your feedback is what helps keep this podcast growing. So thank you again for tuning in. And as always, stay curious, stay inspired, and keep shining your bright ideas onto the world. So until next time, I'm Amber Key.